Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into something incredibly difficult, the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting, October 1st, 2017. Still the deadliest mass shooting by a single person in modern U.S. history.
Yeah, it is. And this event, it only lasted about 10 minutes, but the fallout,
Yeah.
it completely changed how law enforcement, how private security thinks about these kinds of threats in cities.
Absolutely. So the sheer scale is just staggering. We're talking 60 people killed. That includes 2 who died later from their injuries.
Sure.
Then what, nearly 900 injured?
Around 867, yeah.
Yeah.
Between gunfire, shrapnel, the panic,
Mm-hmm.
it's huge.
Yeah.
So our goal today really is to provide a clear account. We want to look at 3 things. First, the timeline, minute by minute, especially the controversial parts.
Right.
Second, the shooter himself, Stephen Paddock. His profile, which is, well, baffling,
Right.
and the total lack of a clear motive. And third is the lessons learned. Big ones. For police, for emergency response, for command structures.
Mm-hmm. It's a scenario that, honestly, authorities just weren't prepared for. A shooter with that kind of tactical advantage high up, firing down from hundreds of yards away.
Exactly. So we need to examine not just the chaos on the ground, but what happened before that. On the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay, there was this critical window, these initial warnings. Why didn't they stop what came next?
Okay, let's dig into that. Okay, let's unpack this whole situation. The setting itself is, well, uniquely vulnerable, wasn't it? You've got this open-air festival, 22,000 people packed in for Jason Aldean.
Right, final night of the festival, big crowd. And then you have Stephen Paddock, 490 yards away, up on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Prime spot, unfortunately.
But the crucial thing, the thing that makes this timeline so important, is that the attack on the crowd, that wasn't the absolute beginning.
No, it wasn't. The clock really starts ticking before the shots hit the festival grounds. It starts with essentially a communication failure inside the hotel.
The geography played a huge role. Like you said, a concrete festival ground surrounded by these tall hotels. It gave him a perfect vantage point.
It did. But the timeline controversy stems from the violence starting before the main attack on the concert. And that suggests maybe there was this window, a chance for intervention that got missed because of how information or lack of it flowed. Hashtag I. The prelude and the dispute, the critical window.
So let's get into that prelude. Around 10:05 p.m., roughly, the very first shots are fired. But not at the crowd.
No. He fires through the door of his suite, 32-135. About 35 rounds. Fired right through the closed door.
Why? What prompted that?
He was interrupted. A hotel security guard, Aziz Campos, was on the floor investigating a door that was left ajar nearby. Not Paddock's door initially, but close enough.
Okay.
Campos walks down the hall. Paddock sees him, presumably through his cameras, and fires through the door, hitting Campos in the thigh.
So that's the moment. That's when the first official alert should have gone out, right?
That's the moment. And Campos, even though he was wounded, he did radio hotel security. He called dispatch. Then, just moments later, a maintenance worker, Stephen Shuck, comes up the hallway for the same door alarm.
Wow.
Shuck sees Campos down, hears the gunfire maybe, and immediately gets on his radio too. Explicitly says, active shooter.
So you got 2 people, Campos and Shuck, both reporting an active shooter, both giving the location, 32nd floor. That information went to hotel security and dispatch.
Correct. Clear, precise information.
But somehow, it didn't translate. It didn't get to the police in a way that triggered an immediate targeted response.
It didn't. And this is where it gets really messy, the timeline controversy.
Yeah.
Because it involves police reports, hotel statements, questions of liability.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Okay, walk us through that. What was the initial story?
Initially, the LVMPD, the Las Vegas police, they put out a timeline suggesting Campos was shot after the mass shooting had already started. Maybe around 10:18 p.m. The idea was maybe Campos distracted Paddock, causing him to stop firing on the crowd.
Which I guess seemed plausible at first.
It did. But then they revised it.
Yeah.
Dramatically. And this is where it got, as you said, really interesting.
This is the flashpoint, right?
Absolutely. The revised LVMPD timeline stated Campos was shot at 9:59 p.m.
9:59, 6 minutes before the mass shooting started at 10:05 p.m.
Exactly. 6 whole minutes. And in an active shooter event, 6 minutes is, well, it's an eternity.
So the immediate question becomes, if police knew at 9:59 p.m. there was an active shooter on the 32nd floor, What could have happened in those 6 minutes? Could they have evacuated? Could they have gotten officers up there faster?
That was the explosive implication. It pointed towards a potential major failure, a failure to act on critical intelligence.
But then MGM Resorts, the hotel owners, they pushed back hard on that 9.59
They
time.
did, very publicly. They disputed the LVMPD's revision. MGM claimed that 9:59 p.m. time came from some unrelated manually logged security event, not the shooting. They insisted the hallway shooting happened much closer to the main attack, like within 40 seconds at 10:05 p.m.
Okay, so that changes everything. 6 minutes versus less than a minute. Huge difference in terms of possible intervention.
Immense difference. A 6-minute gap suggests potential negligence, maybe liability. A 40-second gap suggests it was tragically unavoidable.
So, regardless of who's precisely right on the timing, the whole public disagreement just highlights this fundamental breakdown you mentioned earlier.
It absolutely underscores a failure in the C3, command, control, communication, especially between a private entity, hotel security, and public law enforcement, the police. Those first crucial reports from Campos and Schuck pinpointing the threat, these seem to have gotten lost or delayed, especially once the main attack began.
Right, because then thousands of 911 calls would have just flooded the system.
Exactly. Information overload. Those specific early warnings became just noise in the chaos.
All right, let's shift to the main attack itself, those horrific 10 minutes. Paddock breaks two windows.
Yes, one in his main suite, 32-135, and one in the adjoining room he'd also booked, 32-134. That gave him two firing positions, a wider angle onto the festival grounds below.
And the firing starts almost exactly at 10:05 p.m.
Pretty much on the dot. And he unleashes just a massive amount of fire, over 1,000 rounds in those 10 minutes.
1,000 rounds.
Which explains the horrific casualty count. He wasn't aiming precisely, he was firing in bursts, like 80 to 100 rounds at a time, just spraying the area, saturation fire.
And the reports mentioned something about pauses in the shooting. That seems significant.
Very significant tactically. The gunfire wasn't one continuous stream. There were short breaks, maybe a few seconds here and there.
Why? Reloading? Or maybe checking the hallway?
Probably both. Reloading takes time, even with multiple weapons ready, and he likely was checking his hallway cameras after shooting Campos. But those pauses, however brief, were the only chance people on the ground had to move.
Right. While he's firing, you drop. When it stops for a second, you run.
That was the terrible rhythm of it, a desperate scramble for cover or escape during those fleeting moments of silence.
And down on the festival grounds, the situation was made even worse by confusion and, well, the physical layout.
Definitely. First, the sound. Those initial volleys. Many people thought it was fireworks. It's a common reaction to unfamiliar gunfire sounds in a noisy environment.
That delay in recognition must have been fatal for some.
It absolutely cost precious seconds. Then, once people realized it was gunfire, escape was incredibly difficult. The venue, that 15-acre concrete lot, it was penned in by security fencing.
Standard crowd control stuff, right?
Yeah, but in this situation, those fences acted like funnels. They created terrible choke points. People trying to flee were just jammed together, making them easier targets and slowing any escape. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag 3. The response in chaos.
Okay, so while all this is happening, police are trying to respond, but they're immediately swamped.
Completely swamped and facing major obstacles. First, just figuring out where the shots were coming from.
The echo effect.
Exactly. You're surrounded by tall buildings in Las Vegas. The sound bounces everywhere. Officers on the ground were getting conflicting reports. Some thought the shooter was at the Luxor Hotel next door. Some thought maybe on the ground level, inside the venue itself.
It's just chaos. Pulling resources in all directions.
Total chaos. And remember, the 911 system is overwhelmed. The police radios are jammed. It's an information nightmare.
But officers were trying to follow their training, weren't they? The MACTAC protocols.
Yes. Multi-assault counterterrorism action capabilities. That training kicked in on a tactical level. Officers were forming small strike teams, moving towards the danger, trying to find the source, rendering aid where they could. So tactically, they were doing what they were trained to do.
But strategically, they were lost for a bit.
Strategically, locating the threat took critical time. The breakthrough really came at 10:12 p.m. That's 7 minutes into the shooting.
What happened then?
Officers inside the Mandalay Bay, who were searching floor by floor, finally reported hearing gunfire directly above them. They were on the 31st floor.
Ah, okay, so that finally narrows it down, 32nd floor.
Exactly. That confirmation focused the entire response onto that one floor.
And thankfully, the shooting itself stops just a few minutes later, 10:15 p.m. The 10-minute barrage ends.
Correct. The firing ceases.
Now, the police response to the 32nd floor itself, They actually got there pretty quickly after the shooting stopped, didn't they?
Remarkably quickly, yes. At 10:17 p.m., just 2 minutes after the last shots were fired, the first two LVMPD officers arrive on the 32nd floor.
And they find Campos.
They find the wounded security guard, Jesus Campos, who points them directly to Paddock's suite, 32135.
Okay, so officers are on the scene at the door within 2 minutes of the shooting stopping. But then there's this massive delay. They don't actually breach the room for over an hour. Why?
That's the big question, the hour-long delay. 10:17 p.m., they're there, but the breach isn't until 11:20 p.m.
What took so long?
Several factors compounded the delay. First, Paddock had anticipated a police response. He'd actually used an L bracket to screw the stairwell door shut, leading to his hallway.
Seriously, he barricaded the access.
Yeah, so officers had to physically pry that door open, which cost time. Second, once they were on the floor, they had to prioritize clearing other guests, evacuating nearby rooms to avoid crossfire or potential hostages.
Makes sense.
Third, they decided they needed SWAT for the final breach, a high-risk entry against a heavily armed suspect, possibly with explosives. You need the specialized team and equipment.
And getting SWAT mobilized and into position takes time, too.
It does. They needed to assemble, plan the breach, bring up heavy equipment, shields, breaching tools, explosives, all while securing the floor.
So finally, 11:20 p.m., they use explosives to breach the door.
Breach occurs at 11:20 p.m., and then just 7 minutes later, at 11:27 p.m., the call comes over the radio. Suspect down.
They found him dead.
Yes. Paddock was found dead inside. Self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, surrounded by his arsenal.
So from the start of the mass shooting at 10:05 p.m. to suspect down at 11:27 p.m., that's almost an hour and a half.
1 hour and 22 minutes, yeah. And that whole timeline, from the missed window before the attack to the delay in the breach, it really exposed some deep problems with how prepared authorities were for this specific kind of high-rise attack.
Okay, let's pivot now. From the chaos of the attack itself to the chilling, meticulous planning behind it, we need to talk about Stephen Paddock. Who was this guy? And the big frustrating question, why? Why did he do it? The motive seems completely missing.
Yeah, the profile is almost unnerving in how ordinary it seems on the surface. He's 64 years old, wealthy, retired. Former life included jobs like postal worker, IRS agent, auditor. Made his money mostly through real estate deals.
And personality-wise.
Described consistently as a quiet introvert, didn't like eye contact, didn't talk much unless it was about gambling, specifically video poker. He spent hours, days, playing high-stakes video poker. Hashtag #IMAR. The profile of the perpetrator.
A lot gets made of his father, right? Benjamin Paddock. He was a notorious bank robber, on the FBI's most wanted list even.
He was, and it's a dramatic detail, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But how much it actually influenced Stephen Paddock, that's debatable. Reports suggest Stephen and his siblings had very little contact with their father after he was arrested or went on the run when Stephen was young.
So maybe not a direct influence, but perhaps subconsciously a model for notoriety.
That's one of the theories the FBI looked into later, yeah. The idea of seeking infamy, maybe echoing his father's criminal fame. But it certainly wasn't part of his daily life or upbringing. His actual life seemed to revolve almost entirely around gambling.
High-stakes gambling. And that gambling habit, ironically, is what allowed him to prepare for the attack.
Absolutely. It's a key part of this. He played so much video poker, and at such high limits, that casinos like Mandalay Bay considered him a high roller, a VIP.
So we got comps, free rooms, perks.
Exactly. Significant comps. Free suites, often very nice ones with good views, access to private lines, maybe special treatment from staff, and crucially, access to things like service elevators.
Ah, and that's how he did it?
That's how we weaponize hospitality, as some have called it. The very system designed to give him privacy and convenience as a valued customer. He used it to smuggle an arsenal into the hotel over several days.
How many guns are we talking about, and how did he move them without anyone noticing?
Inside the suite, they found 23 rifles and 1 handgun, plus thousands of rounds of ammunition. He brought it all up, likely over the course of about a week, using multiple suitcases. At least 22 pieces of luggage were involved.
22 suitcases full of guns and ammo.
Yeah. And because he was a known high roller, using the service elevators, likely helped by staff who wouldn't think twice about a VIP moving luggage, nobody questioned it. Plus, the Do Not Disturb sign meant staff wouldn't enter his room for days, giving him complete privacy to prepare. The system worked for him. Hashtag tag 2, meticulous planning and arsenal.
Okay, so this wasn't some sudden snap. The level of planning involved, it's staggering. How long was he working on this?
The investigation suggests the serious planning phase started at least a year before the attack. Around October 2016, there was a noticeable spike in his firearm purchases. He ended up buying over 55 weapons in that period.
Just to 5 guns.
In total, yeah. Though he only brought 24 into the hotel suite. And the planning wasn't just buying guns. It was about selecting the target.
And Route 91 wasn't his first choice, was it?
No. The FBI found evidence he'd researched and even booked hotel rooms overlooking other large open-air events. Lollapalooza in Chicago back in August 2017. And the Life is Beautiful Festival, right there in Las Vegas just the month before, September 2017.
So what does that tell you? It wasn't about country music or that specific crowd. It was about the venue.
Exactly. It suggests the target was chosen based on purely tactical criteria. He wanted a large, dense crowd in an open space, viewed from an elevated position with clear lines of sight. Route 91 just offered the optimal geometry for maximum casualties.
Chilling. Okay, the arsenal inside the room. 23 rifles, 1 handgun. What kind of rifles?
A mix. Mostly AR-style platforms. 14 were AR-15 type rifles, and 8 were the larger caliber AR-10 type.
And the key element, the thing that made the casualty count so incredibly high in just 10 minutes, the bump stocks.
Yes, that was a critical force multiplier, bump stocks.
Explain those again, just clearly. What do they do? Because they became the focus of a lot of debate afterwards.
Right. So a bump stock is a device you attach to a semi-automatic rifle. It replaces the normal stock and grip. What it does is, it uses the rifle's own recoil energy to slide the rifle back and forth slightly. Your trigger finger stays still, but the rifle bumps forward against it after each shot, causing the trigger to be pulled again very rapidly.
So it makes a legal semi-automatic fire almost like an illegal fully automatic machine gun.
Essentially, yes. It simulates full auto fire, allowing for hundreds of rounds per minute. Paddock had fitted bump stocks to 12 of his rifles. Without those, he would have had to pull the trigger for every single shot. The rate of fire, and therefore the number of casualties, would have been drastically lower in that 10-minute window. It turned legally obtainable rifles into weapons of mass casualty.
Which brings us back to the hardest part of this whole thing. Despite this incredibly detailed planning, the huge arsenal, the sheer scale of the attack, Paddock left nothing behind. No note, no manifesto, no online posts explaining why.
Nothing. And the FBI conducted one of the most extensive investigations ever. They interviewed hundreds of people, dug through his finances, his digital life, and officially, the motive remains undetermined.
For the survivors, for the families of those killed, that must be just agonizing, that lack of an answer.
It's often described as the worst part. It leaves this gaping hole, a narrative vacuum. And that vacuum is not just psychologically painful, it's dangerous because it gets filled with speculation, with theories, sometimes with misinformation.
So what were the main theories investigators explored, even if none were conclusive?
Well, they looked hard at his gambling, this idea of resentment towards casinos and financial decline.
Right, you mentioned he lost a lot of money recently.
Tens of thousands in the weeks just before the attack.
Mm-hmm.
And there were reports he was very upset about casinos cutting back on his high roller perks. He'd even been banned from some places in Reno, apparently.
So anger about losing money and status?
That was the theory. Maybe a feeling of being disrespected by the very places he poured his life into. But investigators felt it didn't quite seem enough, not for this level of violence. Didn't feel like the primary driver.
What about his health or mental state?
That was another major line of inquiry. The FBI report from 2019 floated the idea of declining health and financial ruin. Paddock apparently had some chronic health issues. And even though he was wealthy, he'd apparently burned through maybe $1.5 million relatively quickly.
So the idea is maybe he saw his life deteriorating, his health, his money, his gambling status, and decided to go out in some horrific blaze of glory.
Sort of. A desire for infamy, perhaps. Taking control of his own narrative, his exit in the most destructive way possible, maybe tying back subconsciously to his father's criminal notoriety.
And then there's this more clinical idea, something about brain chemistry.
Yeah, the neurological hypothesis. Some experts propose something called reward deficiency syndrome. The idea is maybe due to genetics or age-related changes in his brain, specifically dopamine receptors, he needed increasingly extreme levels of stimulation to feel any sense of reward or satisfaction.
So gambling wasn't cutting it anymore.
Maybe not. Or maybe the declining perks made it less rewarding. So according to this theory, he might have been seeking the ultimate, most extreme stimulus imaginable to alleviate what was described by some who knew him as a profound, almost unbearable sense of boredom.
Mass murder as a cure for boredom. That's incredibly bleak.
It is, and it highlights the core problem here. We have meticulous planning, clear tactical choices. But the why is just a collection of possibilities, none of them fitting perfectly.
So what does that mean for us? For you listening, we're left with this void.
It means we have to confront the terrifying possibility that some acts of extreme violence might not have a neat, understandable motive. The lack of a clear political or ideological driver makes it feel random, unpredictable, maybe unpreventable. And that's psychologically much harder to deal with than an attack you can attribute to a specific cause. This void, this lack of meaning, is what denies closure and, as we'll discuss, fuels a whole secondary crisis of misinformation.
Okay, so that 10-minute attack, it didn't just cause immense human tragedy, it exposed huge cracks in the system supposed to handle these things. The response itself, it wasn't about lack of bravery, was it? Individual officers acted heroically.
Absolutely not. There were countless acts of bravery, but it was a failure of the system, a failure of doctrine, communication, and command structure when faced with something totally new. ##guy, law enforcement doctrine shock. Let's start with the shock to law enforcement doctrine itself. Before this, almost all active shooter training in the U.S. focused on, well, flat environments. Schools, malls, offices, two-dimensional threats.
Right, ground level.
Exactly. This attack created what you could call a vertical threat doctrine gap. Police responders simply weren't trained or equipped, mentally or logistically, to deal effectively with a shooter hundreds of feet up, hundreds of yards away, raining down fire. It changed the game completely.
And that confusion on the ground was massively amplified by the communication systems just failing. The C3 collapse, as it's called.
Catastrophic failure of command, control, and communication. Two parts to this. First, the internal command structure wasn't even properly in place. The designated incident command post, the nerve center for managing a crisis. It was unmanned when the shooting started.
Unmanned. How does that happen?
The lieutenant in charge had apparently left the post shortly before and hadn't formally transferred command. So for a critical period, there was a leadership vacuum. Officers on the ground had to basically set up an ad hoc command structure themselves.
So you've got officers trying to use their tactical training, MAC-TAC, forming teams, moving towards the sound.
Right, the tactical part was happening.
But there's no central brain directing them, filtering the chaos, giving strategic orders.
Exactly. Tactical competence was there, but the strategic oversight, the coordination, it initially fell apart. And then you add the external communication failures. The 911 dispatch system, the CAD system, it slowed down, even froze, under the sheer volume of calls.
Thousands of people calling at once.
And the police radios were just as bad. The official report mentioned 638 radio transmissions just in the first hour. But worse than that, officers were hitting their emergency buttons on the radios.
The panic button.
Yeah, which makes sense in that situation. But every time someone hit it, it locked up that radio channel for about 10 seconds until a dispatcher could clear it. That happened 151 times in the first hour.
So the system designed for emergencies was actually blocking emergency communication.
In effect, yes. Critical updates, location information, tactical commands, repeatedly getting silenced by the system's own overload.
It's wild. You train officers for the fight, but the system to manage the fight collapses.
It highlights that sophisticated tactics are pointless if the command and communication backbone fails. Eventually, a captain on scene recognized the leadership void and stepped up to establish that ad hoc command. But vital minutes were lost just trying to get organized amidst the chaos. #TAG2 said, the medical catastrophe and citizen responders.
And that same kind of systemic shockwave hit the medical side too, right? Hospitals have plans for mass casualty incidents, MCIs.
They do. But those plans were designed for, well, different kinds of MCIs. The first thing that failed was triage.
Sorting the wounded.
Right. Standard civilian triage, called START, requires responders to get to the victims, assess them quickly, and tag them red for immediate, yellow for delayed, green for minor, black for deceased.
But they couldn't get to the victims.
Not safely. The scene was still under active fire for those first 10 minutes and chaotic afterwards. So victims weren't being triaged by professionals on site. They were being grabbed by friends, by strangers, and driven straight to hospitals.
So hospitals like Sunrise just got flooded with completely unsorted, severely injured patients.
An absolute deluge. And it forced the doctors and surgeons there to make an incredible, spontaneous shift. They essentially abandoned standard civilian surgical protocols and adopted principles from battlefield medicine.
What does that mean, practically?
It means implementing damage control surgery. Instead of trying to do complex, definitive repairs right away, which takes hours, they focus solely on stopping the bleeding and stabilizing the patient as fast as possible. Quick procedures to control hemorrhage, manage airways, pack wounds, get the patient stable enough to survive the initial crush, then maybe do the bigger repairs later. Speed over perfection because time was life.
Like a mass ace unit almost.
Very much like that mentality, yeah. And even then, the system strained. The supply chain just couldn't keep up with that volume of military-style trauma.
They ran out of things.
Ran out of critical supplies, chest tubes for collapsed lungs, intubation drugs, IV fluids, and especially blood. Staff were literally running around the hospital scavenging supplies from other departments, other floors, trying to keep pace.
And the number of fatalities.
Immediately overwhelmed the hospital morgue. Sunrise Hospital actually had to convert its endoscopy suite, where they do colonoscopies and things, into a temporary secure morgue just to handle the number of deceased arriving. It's a grim picture of how badly the system was overloaded.
But the defining part of the medical story maybe is how most people got to the hospital, not in ambulances.
No, that's maybe the biggest lesson for future planning, the power of self-transport. Studies after the event found nearly 90% of the casualties got to the hospitals in private cars, taxis, Ubers, pickup trucks.
Wow, 90%.
Driven by other concert-goers, by strangers who just stopped to help. This citizen-led evacuation undoubtedly saved countless lives by getting people to surgeons much faster than the formal ambulance system could have managed.
But it created its own problems for the hospitals, right?
Oh, absolutely. A constant, unpredictable stream of critically injured patients arriving with no warning, often with no first aid applied in the field, like tourniquets, and frequently with no ID. It was heroic, essential, but also created chaos on the receiving end. It really forces us to think about the public not just as victims, but as the crucial first responders in these events. #3 acts of heroism or resilience.
And amidst all this system failure, this chaos, there are just incredible stories of individual bravery, people stepping up.
So many. It's the counter-narrative to the horror. Ordinary people becoming heroes in an instant. You mentioned Sonny Melton, the nurse killed shielding his wife.
Yeah.
You had off-duty medics, military veterans in the crowd who just took charge, using shirts as bandages, belts as tourniquets, guys like Rob Ledbetter, an Army vet, Chris Reitmeyer, a nurse.
Yeah.
They started organizing triage points, directing people, applying pressure to wounds, basically imposing some order on small pockets of the chaos using their training.
They became the response system where the official one couldn't reach.
They did. A decentralized, spontaneous response. And think about the transport piece again. Antonio McClandow, a city bus driver, saw what was happening, pulled over, and turned his bus into a makeshift ambulance. Loaded up maybe 30 gunshot victims, and drove them straight to Sunrise.
Incredible.
People using their pickup trucks like ambulances, rideshare drivers just loading up injured strangers. Acts of just pure human courage and compassion.
And that story about the fence.
Yeah, an off-duty police sergeant, Greg White. He realized people were trapped by a security fence. He took out his pocket knife and just started cutting a hole in it. They estimate maybe 400 people were able to escape through that gap he created. A simple act with potentially huge consequences.
It all kind of coalesced into that phrase, didn't it? Vegas strong.
It did. The community response afterwards, the huge lines to donate blood, the vigils, the creation of the community healing garden, all the free services offered to victims and first responders, it showed that even when official systems buckled under the strain, the human spirit, the community resilience was incredibly powerful.
So let's connect this to the bigger picture now. What were the lasting changes? How did this tragedy actually shift policy, shift security thinking? And let's talk about that secondary crisis, the damage caused by the misinformation that rushed into that motive vacuum. #I, policy and security evolution.
Okay, policy-wise, the immediate focus, maybe predictably, landed on the hardware, specifically the bump stocks.
Right, because they were so clearly linked to the high rate of fire.
Exactly. It was a tangible thing lawmakers could target. And interestingly, even the NRA, which usually opposes gun restrictions, issued a rare statement suggesting maybe bump stocks should face additional regulation.
Which led to a federal ban.
It did. In 2019, the Trump administration used regulatory power, didn't need Congress, to reclassify bump stocks as machine guns under existing federal law, effectively banning them nationwide.
Okay, so problem solved.
Well, not quite. First, that ban was challenged in court. And in 2024, the Supreme Court overturned it, saying the ATF had overstepped its authority. So federally, they're not banned anymore, though some states might have their own laws. But more importantly, focusing only on bump stocks, well, understandable, kind of missed the bigger picture. Paddock acquired all his guns legally. Even the new laws passed in Nevada after the shooting, things like expanded background checks or red flag laws, probably wouldn't have stopped him. He had no criminal record, no history of documented mental health issues that would flag him.
So the bump stock ban was like treating a symptom, not the underlying disease.
You could argue that, yeah. It addressed the how of the high casualty rate, but not the why of the attack itself or the systemic failures in prevention and response.
So where was the more significant lasting change then?
Arguably, it was in private security doctrine, especially for hotels and large event venues, the paradigm shift to 3D security.
Thinking vertically, not just horizontally.
Exactly. Security before was mostly focused on the ground perimeter. Fences, bag checks, guards at entrances. Route 91 proved you had to look up. You had to control the high ground. Adjacent hotels, parking garages, any structure offering a sniper's perch. Those became part of the security assessment.
Security now has to be aware of the surrounding buildings, the windows overlooking a venue.
They absolutely do. Identifying potential firing positions, maybe coordinating with those buildings, having overwatch. It's a whole new layer of complexity.
And this also hit the hotel industry directly, right? The do not disturb sign thing.
Big time.
Yeah.
That was a sacred cow guest privacy. But after Paddock used his D&D sign to essentially create a private weapons staging area for days, hotels had to react. Major chains like Wynn, Hilton, many others, they revised their policies.
How so?
Now, staff are generally allowed or even required to enter a room if the D&D sign has been up for a certain period, maybe 12 hours, maybe 24, depends on the hotel. It's a welfare check, but it's also a security check, balancing privacy with safety.
And festivals change too. More surveillance.
Yeah, things like using drones for aerial surveillance of the perimeter and surrounding areas, training staff not just on reaction but on predictive threat analysis, looking for behaviors that might indicate someone is planning something, like Paddock's extensive movements with heavy luggage.
Okay, let's circle back to that agonizing lack of motive. We said it denies closure, but it did something else too, didn't it? It created fertile ground for misinformation, an infodemic, you called it.
Yeah, and that caused real secondary harm, especially to survivors and victims' families. It compounded their trauma.
Why does that happen? Why do people cling to baseless theories when the truth is unknown?
Psychologically, sometimes uncertainty is harder to bear than even a terrible certainty. The idea of a completely random, motiveless act of mass murder by someone like Paddock, wealthy, retired, no obvious grievances, it's deeply unsettling. It makes the world feel chaotic and unsafe. So sometimes people prefer a fabricated explanation, even a malicious one, because it imposes some kind of order, some kind of understandable, if evil, pattern onto the event.
So what were the big conspiracy theories that spread after Route 91?
There were several, but maybe three main ones. The most persistent was the multiple shooters theory.
Fueled by the echoes, the rate of fire.
Exactly. People heard sounds coming from different directions. The sheer volume of bullets made it seem impossible for one person. But the official investigation was incredibly thorough on this. 10 months by the FBI and LVMPD, ballistics, trajectories, thousands of hours of CCTV. They definitively concluded Paddock acted alone from those two suites. All the shots originated from there.
Okay, what else?
Then you had the attempts to assign a motive where none existed. Political or ideological links. Immediately after the shooting, you had claims he was connected to ISIS. Then claims he was linked to Antifa or some other political group.
Any truth to those?
Zero.
Yeah.
The FBI found absolutely no evidence linking Paddock to any terrorist group, any political organization, any religious ideology. He seemed completely apolitical and religious.
And the third one, this one always feels particularly cruel, the crisis actors theory.
Yeah, this is perhaps the most disgusting, the claim that the victims weren't real, that the survivors you saw interviewed, the people with horrific injuries, were actors, that the whole thing was faked, staged by the government, usually with the goal of promoting gun control.
How do you even respond to something like that?
You point to the overwhelming, undeniable evidence, the 60 death certificates, the 850-plus injured people treated in hospitals with documented gunshot wounds and trauma, the massive medical response, the temporary morgues. The reality is irrefutable. But this theory isn't about evidence. It's about weaponizing grief and trauma, sowing distrust, and deliberately hurting people who have already suffered immensely.
It's a grim reminder that in the absence of clear answers, some people will choose to invent malicious ones.
And that the void itself can become a source of ongoing pain. #tag outro. So when you put it all together, this deep dive into Route 91, it really shows the full spectrum, doesn't it? You have this chillingly meticulous planning from Paddock, exploiting every loophole in systems designed for convenience. You have catastrophic failures in official command and communication systems unprepared to this kind of vertical, distant threat.
But you also have incredible resilience, the heroism of ordinary people, citizen responders basically creating a medical evacuation system on the fly, the doctors adopting battlefield techniques, the community pulling together.
Absolutely. And the lasting lessons are profound. Tactical skill isn't enough if the strategic command fails. Preparedness has to be flexible, adaptable. Security has to think in 3 dimensions now, not just 2. Civilian medical systems need to integrate principles of damage control surgery for mass casualty events.
And maybe the biggest lesson is about the public. Recognizing and empowering citizens as the true first responders through things like widespread stop the bleed training.
Exactly. Because the official help might be delayed or overwhelmed. But the person next to you, they might be your first best hope.
And yet, after all this analysis, after all the investigations, that central question mark remains the why. It's still elusive.
It is. And maybe that's the final thought to leave you with. What stands out most to you when you consider that gap, the gap between the shooter's tactical precision and the complete strategic vacuum of his motive? Or the gap between the tactical bravery of responders and the strategic collapse of the systems around them? Thinking about those disconnects, that might tell us a lot about our vulnerabilities and our resilience when the unthinkable happens for seemingly no reason at all.